For it is by grace that we are saved through faith, and for those of us around before, as it were, before the Messiah was in bodily form to present himself as sacrifice on earth, our faith was imputed to us as righteousness, and that speaks to the power in Yeshua's blood that was left to dry here in the soils of beloved Yerushalayim. You shall see him returning in glory right over there. From Kidron Valley Elijah pointed eastward towards the Mount of Olives. When descending from above you shall behold his wound impressions, and together cry out as you learn that in armies and governments in another besides him you cannot fully trust, as he comes to reign from here and is to judge the nations and do that which even your mighty army at this time could not in total do. You shall see his wound impressions and think of a verse in Zechariah's scrolls when you, unlike the world angrily and in futility shaking the fist at him, shall turn to mourning for him, and under earthen distresses lament desperate and sore. You will together receive the one as your conqueror and king, who alone takes away the sins of the world. And again Elijah turned his attention elsewhere, fixedly staring at several butterflies that seemed to overtake a young woman from behind where she'd been observing from just off to the side of Elijah while perching cross-legged on a log. Her fashionable and outrageously bright leg warmers snuggled around her shins and thighs, impossibly bright and colorful while detracting from any ability to center her as the focal point of her aspect. The colors of the rainbow looping around the stockings in the forefront of a blossoming conflagration of white moths in winged flight, and lifting in iridescent ribbons of a shroud of color on, blowing in non-committal fashion on a soft zephyr, on the wind slightly defying an easy grazing and floating on through. Elijah murmured as though 100 miles away and sedated unto a relative calming. Behold, there we have a visual depiction in the cocoon as a form of death to the winded glory of the butterflies as resurrection. Do you see the cocoons trapped inside of the spider webs in the bushes? With satisfaction he committed, in steep marvel enamoredly watching on, helplessly captivated and enthused, and outwardly revealing as much as though exasperated. Yet with joy he muttered, grabbing tufts of long unkempt hair, acceptable because his strong and attractable facial features ever came to the forefront of his aspect, clutching inside of his palms and leaning inward and then out, sideways stepping without a coercing or sending off balance as he bent low to the ground and in the opposite direction recoil and bent backwards, face receiving the suffuse of light in an otherworldly defiance of what twilight's unobtrusive bless could allow. Yes, he stepped closer to the crowd to where he'd been before Joel had stepped forward. We do wait for the Messiah to return, requiring from us scarcely a thing but our subservience to our King who's given his life. He has orchestrated this thematically choreographed thing, the incorruptible for the corruptible, one with the power to conquer death itself, who to the cross nailed the ordinances of the law in its requirements without abolishing schoolmaster law. We wait for our risen Messiah, who is en route and not for his, lazily this time while still beholding the flight of the butterflies, he with one hand pointed toward the priest and with his other touched against his own chest before, in a succession of steps he approached the priest while against his sternum tapping, with each step taken forward the intensity of his strikes increasing before, stopping in front of the priest with his crooked hand with fingers as rigid as daggers extended. He caused them to impact with scarcely his own but with the priest's chest, on a dime, having stopped and shifted before rolling out on a heel just as he ripped it as easily as might a paratrooper his pull cord, breaking away from his squaring of shoulders with the man when with his forward hand punched he with the questionless speed of a striking venomous cobra. Elijah's lacerating shout this time hurting the ears as persons, whether mindlessly or deliberately, plugged their fingers into ears or held hands over the sides of their heads when the prophet shouted in a sound barrier threatening exclamation that rang in the forefront of an overhead thundering jet engine. And not for his cocoon, the prophet added emphasis by stealing the breaths of these gasping spectators when that which he'd ripped off of the neck of the clergyman he'd tossed into a thicket toward the open expanse far away from them as golden flecks of sunshine. Again, how unlikely during waning hours of twilight, in bedazzling shine, to find the darting trajectory as persons, largely with some exception while murmuring to each other, turned to the perfected self-communication form that is soliloquy. Elijah turned toward the frightened priest and extended his hand toward his neck, touching there and then resting the palm of same hand against his shoulder. A sobering stare that cut through the man as the prophet said, "The Lord does arrive as quickly and before you can even retrieve that, so do not trouble yourself with design to find it." The scrape against the man's neck and the drop of blood threatening to leak disappeared, any lacerating pain there subsiding before Elijah said, adopting a calmer disposition as the man, because he could not as calmly as possible or at all retreat in the fashion of his peers, grew tremulous and aware of the fact only painfully. "Be at ease. The Lord commands, come out of her, my people, lest yet partake in her sins. To your society does the Lord himself verily speak this thing. Man, do wear your devotion only. Where does the Master swallow up thy curse from sin? And do not again attempt to revive him by even symbol, where 'tis on the other side of the vacated grave that he has removed the stain of sin from the redeemed soul. Find him there. If you seek his finished work anywhere else, then do straightway convene atop the crookedly paved streets of idolatry on the other side of the cross, where a finished work does not a substitutionary sacrifice make." Later in the evening, when shadows elongated neared a swooning Elijah, as was his manner, found a way to amid a great assembly lose himself in the crowd. This time the prophet set to epipe again without first blinding temporarily the eyes of those around him. Behind a large gnarly olive tree with tightly wrapping arms, with sun by now close to towards twilight silver setting, he stood cupping his hand over his chin while listening to the enigmatic Eleazar Elias ben Yehuda inside of a cleft within a copse atop Olive's Mount, to where throngs of visitors had made their way, as usual eager to listen to the charismatically assertive and strong-voiced Jewish prophet. The one doing most of the speaking, none other than the man singularly responsible not for the Protestant revival that was largely next to God attributed to persons like an Elijah and Moses and the bold lions inspired by them as ones fearless of the Antichrist and his children, but 'twas to an upsurge in numbers of Catholics that the man Padre Pietro di Rome Dianos had singularly fueled at the time of his affiliating with Eleazar in Jerusalem, having partitioned his time as countering force and as religious head to soften and pad the coarse and ragged edges of the political head in Nasser Hussein. Moses having made his way to another section of land on the same mount, with persons as usual understandably making like liquid mercury spilled on top of a varnished table in quick retreat outward, yet within perimeter of same table in same consistency wherever Moses and Elijah, bearing power disproportionately, enveloped on a scene, oftentimes from out of nowhere, and who could thus be expected to appear anywhere. It was as though to the prospect in a promise for a large number of Jews depending on an impostor Messiah this hour had come. Many persons having determined 'twas found amid this convergence of bantering prophetic voices conspicuous for non-compatible tenets that only feebly pointed toward the root of their emanations and espoused truths. When examined, were such deductions found inconclusive as witnesses from the rear, with openly applicable to a competing hostile view as instructors gazing back from the front, and so many were the disconnected and lost souls caught in the middle. Elijah was poised to counter another of the world's many religious systems that he knew, where compared with the Messiah and his truth as centering and sole guide, would be but a manifestation of largely a composite of several views saying one thing, with the only a few questions put to these adherents. Questions largely for non-answers discovered in an exposing of the specific matter, and thereby turning light atop a liable in fact atrocity scenario as easily as does the sun turn the head of the sunflower to that which cradles the sun. From outside of them Temple Mount ever reliably they could be found, attracting their hordes, many of whom with chagrin, and given the context of the about shift and what felt like the irresolve in the breaking of the inclusion of agreed upon handling with certain restrictions in the name of accommodating larger groups of persons was included in the Articles of Agreement, as important to any peace treatment or any arms control agreements made between us. The man, despite himself, had unwittingly provided an easy proof for the espoused views amid many regarding the inclusion of the time lull or gap separating Daniel's 69th week of years from the 7 sevens to consummate the 70 weeks of years in full. It requires guts to take any one of them onto the face, said one visitor traipsing alongside the wall nearest the Jewish quarter, Eleazar Elias ben Yehuda, and the master of the law. We declare it straightway. Eliyahu, Hanavi and Moshe impostors, both of whom were scarcely astonished by the object's temple mount discovery. To take these to task straightway, are you schooled for a class that you'd wish to sign up for in the least, whether coming from the prophets true or false? The man, thinking to render an offensive word to Jews, he exclaimed, well, the time of the Gentiles is come and gone, saying many of the faithful. So how? And by Elijah he was interrupted with, oh, the time of the Gentiles. You demand, do you? As sure as Abraham was pointed to the stars and informed that many others shall in addition to his own people be included in the fishnet comprising Abraham's descendants or God's family with sworn loyalty to Abraham's dash, Yahweh's dash, to say, religion. And so then, I believe in Brit Chadashah that, to quote you, you know as clearly as you do know any known thing, as you said, that the time of the Gentiles needs come in. So you wish to disannul the Gentiles' promise, do you? By concluding 70 within the first half of the first century before even one letter had been written later on by this one chiefest of the Lord's apostles unto them. With such a case prevented for me, for us over here, then why to argue against you at all? Please attest to more in argument for me. I do greatly thirst and tire of speaking besides. Unable to pause, continued he, and for whom are the 70 given? Do remind me. Do you not know that the consummating of the 70 weeks of years, and more expressly these 7 years as the 70th, does result in the return of the Messiah and the restoration of all things? Many, knowing my arriving on the scene, did designate the time of same 70, reserved for reason of the widespread delusion until the later half of the week. Dovetail off of this, continue next / with Piatre de Rome Council of Trent, let him be anathemas / Mariology / and traditions, some also of an espousing of monotheism only without requiring necessarily an inclusion of Messiah as revealed.
So that was the end of that section there called, that's Eliatribe. So after this 3.5 years of the 7, because they wouldn't be here talking if they weren't for that. There's a big jump that happens earlier in the book to take us there, so that I could get it done, and it's already in. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of good drama and things like that. There's so many different personages, political, common people, religious, prophecy, church group. There's so many different countries. There's at least 3 languages, and on and on and on. So there's flashbacks of the time of Jesus. There's flash forwards or forward glimpses to the time after the 70th week, when everything's fulfilled and God is one all in the universe. And of course, this is all about the 70th week of Daniel, which is the 7 last final years of 7 years of common time, about which Jesus said there wouldn't be a time more tumultuous than that time to come, and there wasn't ever a time that was tumultuous before that, like in the fashion that this one, this kind of stuff. Anyway, my screen's jumping around. I'm gonna make sure the audio's open. It's December 7th, 2023. All rights are reserved. Eli James. Production is called 70. My phone number is 412-683-1.